My name is Marin Hale, 41 years old, senior systems engineer, at least I was, until the morning I became the ghost haunting my own invention. The boardroom smelled of cold coffee and panic. 12 people in tailored suits sat beneath the pale light of Astrovolt's skyline tower, waiting for someone to speak. On the wall behind them, the company's logo flickered a sunburst bleeding white against the gray. Nathan Pierce, our CEO, stood at the head of the table, a practiced calm tightening his jaw. In front of him lay the patent folder that had been sealed for months, stamped with the words "Proprietary Property of Astrovolt Technologies." He hadn't expected me to be in the room. The company lawyer cleared her throat, voice careful and dry. According to the United States Patent and Trademark Office, the registered inventor for the Helion-3 storage array is listed as... Her eyes flicked toward me. Marin Hale. The silence hit like pressure before a storm. I watched Nathan's hand twitch toward his tie, his confidence bleeding away in microscopic tremors. 17 years of my life, every equation, every prototype, every night I'd stayed in the lab while others went home had been buried under his name. And now, one line of text was dragging it all back into the light. He tried to recover. "That's a clerical error," he said softly, but the strain cracked his voice. I placed my old lab notebook on the table. The spine was frayed, the ink faded, but the signature at the bottom of each page was mine. Beside it, my attorney opened a folder and slid a printed receipt across the glass. Date February 9th. Inventor Marin Hale. Assignment unsigned. The legal counsel inhaled sharply. The chairwoman's pen stopped moving. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Nathan looked at me like a man realizing the floor beneath him wasn't solid. I straightened my jacket, my voice steady. "You took my work." "Nathan," I said. "But you can't take me." The pen dropped from his hand. The silence shattered 3 months earlier. I was just an engineer who believed loyalty meant safety. When I first walked into Astrovolt, I was 24 and still believed that intelligence and effort were enough to build a life. The company was small, then a handful of engineers working in a converted warehouse that smelled of solder and rain. We didn't have funding, only faith. I remember the first time Nathan Pierce spoke to me. He was the head of research then, a few years older, confident in a way that made people listen. "You think too far ahead, Hale," he said, watching me sketch heat distribution patterns across a whiteboard. "That's not a flaw. Just don't let anyone convince you it is." I spent the next decade designing what would become EtherCell, a thermal core system capable of storing renewable energy at a fraction of the previous cost. I slept in the lab during winter months, the hum of cooling fans my lullaby. We built something that worked, something that could change how the world consumed power. Nathan used to bring me coffee at dawn. "You're the heart of this place," he'd tell me. Don't forget that. I didn't. I kept every version of my designs, every draft, signed and dated, because he once said great engineers should always leave a trail of light. When Astrovolt grew, the startup culture hardened into corporate steel. Investors replaced idealists. Nathan moved upstairs first to VP, then to CEO. Our hallway conversations turned into calendar appointments. His praise became polished memos, but the work still mattered. I believed that. The year we hit our first billion in valuation, he toasted to innovation and legacy. He said my name on stage, smiled as flashbulbs went off. And then months later, my division was restructured under new leadership. My name vanished from project files. My prototypes were relocated. I told myself it was temporary, that Nathan had a plan. What I didn't realize was that loyalty wasn't the ladder I thought it was. It was the rope one I'd been weaving myself for 17 years, strand by strand, waiting for someone else to pull it tight. It happened on a Monday morning that smelled like burnt coffee and rain. I'd just finished recalibrating the EtherCell test chamber when my badge lit red instead of green. A moment later, a message flashed across my monitor report to Human Resources immediately. The walk to the HR wing felt longer than it should have. The air changed there quieter, sterile, as if the walls themselves were trained not to listen. Carol, the HR director, waited behind her desk. A man from legal standing just over her shoulder. "Marin," she began, her tone rehearsed. "We've received reports of unauthorized data transfers from your account, proprietary schematics, export logs, and internal communications." For a second, I thought she was joking. "You think I leaked my own project?" Her smile didn't move. "We take security very seriously. Your system access has been temporarily suspended." Temporary. The word floated like a lie neither of us believed. She pushed a folder toward me, screenshots, timestamps, access logs showing my name attached to data pulls I hadn't made. Every page felt like a small erasure. I reached for the file, but legal's hand stopped me. "Copies can't leave this room. I want my attorney." "Of course," Carol said, "but you'll need to vacate the premises for now." 2 security guards appeared at the door. Polite, but impersonal. I stood, numb, as they followed me back to my desk. Co-workers pretended to type harder, eyes flicking away when I passed. My desk light was already off, drawers locked. Someone had packed a box for me. When the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored panel lab coat wrinkled, ID badge hanging useless. The city below shimmered through the rain. By noon, my inbox was deactivated. By 3, every call went unanswered. By nightfall, recruiters who'd once courted me stopped replying altogether. My credentials had become a warning label. 17 years of blueprints, midnight deadlines, and belief all compressed into one cardboard box pressed against my chest. When the elevator reached the lobby, the doors opened with a quiet chime, and I stepped out into a world where my name no longer meant anything. The first week, I told myself it was a mistake. HR would call. Someone would realize the logs were falsified. Nathan would clear my name. By the second week, I stopped checking my phone. Silence has a weight you can feel in your bones. It pressed against the walls of my apartment until even the hum of the refrigerator sounded like mockery. Emails went unanswered. Recruiters who'd once chased me for interviews now responded with polite half-sentences. "We've moved forward with other candidates." I learned that phrase by heart. I sold my car to cover rent, then the piano my mother had left me. I told myself I didn't need things that couldn't build me back. What I needed was any chance to prove I was still worth something. 2 months in, I found work at a logistics warehouse near the docks. Night shifts, 40 pounds a box. No one there asked for credentials, only that I show up. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. My hands, once used to calibrate precision circuits, now bled from cardboard edges. The foreman called me red because of the streak of auburn hair that never stayed tied back. He didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer it. It was easier to be no one. Every night, when I got home, I opened the box I'd carried out of Astrovolt. Inside were notebooks, my old engineering sketches, the quiet proof of a life that still existed somewhere in ink and graphite. The last page held a small square of paper, yellowed at the corners. My father's handwriting looped across it in fading blue ink. "Always sign your work." He'd written that when I was 12. After I won a science fair he couldn't attend. I used to think it meant pride. Now it felt like survival. Proof that somewhere, somehow, my name had touched something that mattered. Outside, Seattle's rain whispered against the windows, steady and endless. I closed the notebook, drew my knees to my chest, and listened to the silence, and to the faint echo of the life I used to have 3 months after the firing. I stopped expecting fairness. Justice was something that happened to other people. But that morning, as I unloaded crates at the warehouse, a coworker left a flyer on the break room table, Clean Tech Northwest Summit, keynote by Nathan Pierce, CEO of Astrovolt Technologies. I don't know what made me go, maybe curiosity, maybe the need to see what betrayal looked like under stage lights. The ballroom at the convention center glittered with chrome and optimism. Rows of chairs, investors in tailored suits, journalists clutching tablets. I stood in the back, still wearing my worn leather jacket, the faint smell of engine oil clinging to me. When Nathan walked onto the stage, the crowd rose to applaud. His voice filled the room, smooth and rehearsed. "Today," he said, "we unveil the next generation of energy storage ether cell 3.0. The screen behind him lit up. There it was my schematic. Every line, every equation, even the asymmetrical vent pattern I'd designed to optimize thermal flow. He hadn't changed a single thing. Only the logo in the corner was new. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The audience murmured with admiration as Nathan explained his vision. Words I'd once written in technical memos fell from his mouth like they'd always belonged to him. But as the slide advanced, my training overpowered my anger. My eyes caught a line of faint text in the lower corner, just barely visible under the Astrovolt logo. 6 small characters, my initials, embedded as metadata inside the rendering software. No one in the room could see it, but I knew it was there. A lifetime of erasure. And he'd missed the smallest detail. I walked out before the applause ended. The city air hit me cold and clean. For the first time in months, my pulse didn't race from fear, but from clarity. He thought he'd buried me under his empire. He'd only built it on my name. I found Cassandra Liu through a forum for displaced engineers. Someone had written, "If you were wronged and can prove it, she's the one you call." Her office sat above a bookstore in Capitol Hill, narrow windows. A smell of paper and rain. She looked up from a cluttered desk when I walked in, her black hair tied into a knot that had given up halfway through the day. "You're Hale," she said. "Astrovolt." I nodded. "I have proof they used my work." Cassandra studied me for a long moment, then motioned to a chair. "Start from the beginning." I told her everything: the HR meeting, the accusations, the slide at the summit. When I finished, she tapped her pen against her teeth. "Show me what you have." I opened my worn notebook, the pages filled with dated sketches, equations, cross-references to test runs. Then, on my laptop, I pulled up the old design files, the ones I'd backed up on a drive no one else knew existed. Cassandra leaned closer, scrolling through the data. "Your name's in the metadata," she murmured. "They never scrubbed it." She navigated to the project folder and froze on a scanned PDF assignment of invention rights, pending signature. Her eyes met mine. "This is the document they'd need to legally claim ownership, but it's blank. No signature. No witness. Nothing." I felt my throat tighten. "They fired me before I could sign it." She smiled, small and sharp. "Then it's still yours." For the next week, we worked side by side in that cramped office. She compared timestamps from the USPTO filing queue to my earliest prototypes, proving that the patent existed 2 months before Astrovolt updated its employment clauses. Every scrap of proof I'd ever saved, every late-night note and draft became a piece of armor when she printed the full timeline. I stared at the page in silence. The proof was there. Neat and undeniable. "He built his fortune on my name," I said quietly. Cassandra capped her pen. "Then let's remind him who he's stealing from." The city was asleep when Cassandra hit send. The hum of her office heater filled the silence between us. On the screen, the words glowed sharp and final. "Formal demand for correction of inventorship violation of federal patent law. Timestamp 3:07 a.m. It was done. I watched her lean back, rubbing her temples. "That," she said, "is the kind of letter they can't ignore." I couldn't sleep after that. I sat by the window of my apartment, watching headlights blur across wet asphalt. 17 years of faith had ended with one email, and somehow I felt lighter. By sunrise, my phone began to buzz first, once, then again, then constantly. Cassandra's voice crackled through the speaker. They replied, "The board called an emergency meeting at 9. Looks like Mr. Pierce didn't sleep well either. Outside. The clouds hung low over Seattle, the kind that made the skyline look like it was holding its breath. I put on my only good suit, pressed flat from years in the back of the closet, and tied my hair the way I used to before presentations. My hands didn't shake this time. At 8:45, I parked across from the Astrovolt Tower. The mirrored glass caught the morning light, a fortress built from the same energy I'd helped harness. My badge wouldn't open the doors anymore, but I didn't need it. Cassandra was waiting by the lobby window, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. "They're trying to call it a misunderstanding," she said. "Pierce told the board it's a clerical mix-up, and they believed him. For now." Her tone was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "But they've asked for all original filings. Every one." I followed her into the elevator, my reflection fractured across its steel walls. Each version of me looked different: engineer, outcast, survivor. The doors opened on the top floor. The hallway smelled of glass cleaner and nerves. "Ready?" Cassandra asked. I adjusted the strap of my bag and nodded. I'd spent 17 years building what waited behind that door. Now, it was time to take it back. The boardroom looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the number of people crammed around the glass table, or maybe it was the weight of what Cassandra carried in her briefcase. Either way, the air felt thin. Nathan sat at the head of the table, his suit immaculate, his smile brittle. "Let's keep this civil," he said, voice smooth but tight. "Astrovolt has always valued its people." Cassandra cut him off. "Then you'll value the truth." She placed 3 folders on the table. Perfectly aligned. "Exhibit A," she said, opening the first. "Prototype schematics dated March 3rd. Time-stamped and signed by Miss Hale. Exhibit B, correspondence between Miss Hale and R&D, verifying that the design existed before her reassignment. Exhibit C." She opened the final folder and slid out a printed receipt, the official filing record from the United States Patent Office. Filing date February 9th. Inventor Marin Hale. Nathan leaned back, forcing a laugh. "That proves nothing. The patent was assigned to Astrovolt under our standard employment contract." Cassandra's hand didn't waver as she drew out one more sheet, a scanned PDF marked Assignment of Invention Rights, pending signature. She placed it in front of him. The line for my name was blank. The laugh died in his throat. Across the table, the company's legal counsel swallowed hard. The chairwoman leaned forward, hands folded, expression unreadable. "Mr. Pierce," she said quietly. "Is this document valid?" Nathan's face paled. "There must be another version signed." "There isn't," Cassandra replied. "And by presenting her work as your own, you've committed federal patent misrepresentation. Every slide, every public statement, every investor call recorded. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It had gravity. The chairwoman's voice broke it at last, effective immediately. "You are suspended pending investigation." Nathan's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered against the glass. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath until I exhaled slowly, carefully, like the first lungful after surfacing from deep water. For the first time in months. The air felt clean. The meeting ended the way storms end quietly, as if nothing had ever broken. By the next morning, Astrovolt's legal department sent a notice of mutual resolution, a phrase so polished it almost hid the truth. My patent was reinstated in full. The valuation, $823 million, stared back at me from the final settlement page like a number from someone else's life. I sat in Cassandra's office as she read through the clauses line by line. "Clause 24, she said, tapping the document with her pen, "acknowledges you as sole inventor and grants you lifetime royalties based on current and future applications. You could walk away right now and never work again." I watched rain trace lines across the window. "I don't want to walk away." She smiled, half proud, half exhausted. "Then tell me what you do want." It took me a long time to answer. Money didn't feel like justice. It felt like a receipt. "A correction," I said finally. "Public, official. And I want them to build something good out of what they stole. That afternoon, the board released a statement. Astrovault Technologies regrets the misattribution of the ether cell patent and acknowledges Ms. Marin Hale as its original inventor. No excuses, no legal phrasing to soften the blow, just truth. In black and white. Alongside it came an announcement, the Hale Ethics Initiative, a company-funded program dedicated to transparency in research and protection for engineers reporting misconduct. I didn't ask them to name it after me. They did it anyway. Maybe guilt had finally found a home. Nathan's resignation followed 2 days later. For personal reasons, the press release said. His photo vanished from the company website by the weekend. I read the news from my kitchen table, still wearing the same hoodie I'd worked in at the warehouse. The settlement funds would arrive within a week. Cassandra called to celebrate, but I stayed quiet. Justice didn't feel like victory. It felt heavier, like carrying something delicate through a storm, hoping it wouldn't break again. 6 months later, I unlocked the doors of the Hale Research Collective for the first time. The space was nothing like Astrovault's glass tower, just an old brick building near the Sound, where gulls cried over the docks and the smell of salt clung to everything. It wasn't perfect. That was the point. Inside, rows of second-hand desks lined the open floor. The hum of computers mixed with laughter, real laughter, the kind I hadn't heard in years. Most of the people here were engineers who'd been pushed out of their own labs for asking the wrong questions. I knew every one of their stories, because I'd lived mine. We didn't have shareholders or performance reviews. We had purpose. Cassandra handled our legal structure, refusing a paycheck at first until I forced her to take one. She said she'd rather build something honest than bill another corporation for damage control. The first prototype we tested that spring wasn't revolutionary, just efficient and adaptive storage unit designed by a 23-year-old named Luis, who'd been fired for reporting safety fraud. When the display lit up and the charge held steady, he nearly cried. I told him to sign his name on the blueprint before anyone forgot who made it possible. Later that evening, when the others had gone, I stood by the window, the city lights scattering across the bay like broken glass. On the wall beside me hung my old lab notebook, framed behind tempered glass. The ink had faded, the pages curled, but the words were still there, proof of a beginning that had nearly been erased. I uncapped a pen and added one final line at the bottom of the last page. They fired me for integrity. That's exactly why I survived. Outside, the sky shifted from steel gray to pale gold. The rain had stopped, and for once, I didn't wait for permission to step into the light.